I had always found the small park at the end of our street charming. Nestled between rows of suburban houses, it was a perfect spot for morning jogs and evening strolls. In the center of the park stood an old, intricately carved stone statue of a woman holding a lantern. It had been there for as long as anyone could remember, a silent sentinel overseeing the park. One Friday evening, as the sun set and a gentle twilight fell over the neighborhood, I decided to take a walk to clear my head after a long day at work. The park was empty, its usual crowd likely deterred by the forecast of an approaching storm. I wandered through the pathways, eventually finding myself standing before the statue. There was something oddly captivating about it, the way its eyes seemed to follow you no matter where you stood. The first raindrops began to fall, and I decided to head home before the storm hit. As I walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I turned around, and for a split second, I thought I saw the statue's head turn. I blinked, convinced it was a trick of the fading light, and hurried home, eager to put the unsettling moment behind me. That night, the storm hit with a fury. Thunder rattled the windows, and lightning illuminated the darkened rooms in eerie flashes. I lay in bed, listening to the rain pounding against the roof, trying to calm my nerves. Just as I was about to drift off to sleep, I heard a strange noise coming from outside. It was a soft, rhythmic tapping, like footsteps on the pavement. I got out of bed and peered out the window. The park was barely visible through the sheets of rain, but I could make out the silhouette of the statue in the brief flashes of lightning. My heart skipped a beat when I realized the statue was no longer in its usual spot. It seemed to have moved closer to the edge of the park, almost as if it had taken a step towards my house. I shook my head, trying to dismiss the impossible thought. Statues didn't move. I must be overtired, my mind playing tricks on me. I forced myself back to bed, pulling the covers up to my chin. But sleep didn't come easy. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the wind outside made me jump. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Around midnight, I heard it again, the soft, deliberate tapping. This time, it was much closer. Heart pounding, I crept to the window and peeked through the curtains. What I saw made my blood run cold. The statue was now at the edge of my front yard, its stone eyes fixed directly on my window. The lantern it held glowed with an unnatural light, casting an eerie glow across its face. I stumbled back from the window, my mind racing. This couldn't be happening. Statues didn't come to life. But there it was, undeniable and terrifying. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, my hand shaking. I tried to explain the situation to the dispatcher, but I could tell they thought I was crazy. They promised to send a patrol car to check on me, but I knew it would be too late. The tapping continued, growing louder and more insistent. I could hear it moving around the house, as if the statue was circling, looking for a way in. I barricaded myself in my bedroom, pushing furniture against the door. I sat there, clutching a flashlight, waiting for the police to arrive. When they finally did, the tapping stopped. I heard the officers calling out, their voices muffled by the storm. I opened the door, relief flooding over me, as I saw their flashlights cutting through the darkness. They searched the yard and the park but found nothing out of place. The statue was back on its pedestal, as if it had never moved. The officers left, assuring me it must have been a trick of the storm and my imagination. But I knew better. I had seen the statue move, felt its malevolent gaze. The storm passed, but the terror lingered. I couldn't walk past the park without feeling its eyes on me. My once charming neighborhood had become a place of fear, haunted by the memory of a strange, scary, and creepy encounter with a statue that came to life at night.
Living in a quiet neighborhood nestled beside a serene river, I always felt a sense of peace. The gentle sound of flowing water was my nightly lullaby, and the riverbank was a favorite spot for morning jogs and evening strolls. However, an eerie experience one rainy night changed my perception of that tranquil place forever. It started on an unusually stormy evening. The wind howled and rain lashed against the windows, creating an unsettling atmosphere. My husband was working late, and our kids were at a sleepover, leaving me alone in the house. I decided to curl up with a book, trying to ignore the storm outside. Around midnight, the power flickered and then went out, plunging the house into darkness. I grabbed a flashlight and decided to check the circuit breaker in the basement. As I descended the stairs, the flashlight beam wavered, casting long, flickering shadows on the walls. I found the breaker, but nothing seemed amiss. Just as I was about to head back upstairs, I heard a strange noise outside, a low, haunting melody that seemed to rise and fall with the wind. Curious and slightly unnerved, I decided to investigate. I stepped outside onto the porch, the rain immediately soaking through my clothes. The sound was clearer now, a sort of eerie, almost hypnotic singing coming from the direction of the river. Despite the storm, I felt compelled to follow it. I grabbed an umbrella and set out, the flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. As I approached the river, the singing grew louder and more distinct. It was a mournful tune, filled with sorrow and longing, and it seemed to come from just beyond the trees lining the bank. I pushed through the underbrush, my heart pounding with a mix of fear and curiosity. The flashlight flickered and then died, leaving me in complete darkness. The singing continued, undeterred by the lack of light. I finally reached the riverbank, and what I saw made my blood run cold. Standing in the shallow water was a figure, barely visible in the dim light from the stormy sky. It was a woman, her long hair flowing around her like a dark veil. She wore a tattered white dress, soaked through and clinging to her thin frame. Her back was to me, but the haunting melody was unmistakably coming from her lips. I tried to call out, but my voice caught in my throat. The woman turned slowly, and as she did, the singing stopped. Her face was pale and gaunt, with hollow, black eyes that seemed to pierce through the darkness. She raised a hand, beckoning me to come closer. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I felt rooted to the spot, paralyzed by fear. Suddenly, the river surged, the water rising rapidly and swirling around my ankles. The woman's expression twisted into one of anger, and she let out a bone-chilling scream that echoed through the night. The water continued to rise, pulling me towards her with an unseen force. I struggled to move, to break free, but it felt as though the river itself was holding me in place. In a desperate bid for survival, I forced myself to turn and run. The water fought against me, but adrenaline gave me the strength to break free. I stumbled through the underbrush, the woman's screams and the raging storm blending into a cacophony of terror behind me. I didn't stop until I reached my house, slamming the door shut and collapsing against it, gasping for breath. The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving the neighborhood eerily quiet. I ventured back to the river, half expecting to find some evidence of the night's events, but the river flowed peacefully, with no sign of the woman or the malevolent force that had nearly pulled me in. I told my husband and a few close neighbors, but they dismissed it as a vivid nightmare brought on by the storm. But I knew what I had seen and heard. The river, once a source of tranquility, had revealed a darker, more sinister side. I couldn't shake the feeling that something lurked beneath its surface, waiting for the next stormy night. And though life gradually returned to normal, I never again ventured to the riverbank after dark, haunted by the memory of that strange, scary, and creepy encounter.
Living in a quiet suburban neighborhood, I always felt a sense of safety and calm. The houses were well kept, the lawns meticulously trimmed, and the streets were generally peaceful. It was the kind of place where you knew your neighbors and waved at them during evening strolls. However, an unsettling event shattered this serenity one fateful night. It started like any other evening. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the neighborhood. I was out for my usual jog, a routine I cherished to clear my mind and stay in shape. The air was crisp, the sky a deep indigo, and the streetlights had just flickered on, casting a warm glow on the asphalt. As I rounded the corner near the park, I noticed something odd. There was a rustling sound coming from a dense thicket of bushes lining the sidewalk. At first, I dismissed it as a stray cat or a raccoon, but then, the rustling grew louder and more frantic, accompanied by a low, guttural growl that sent a shiver down my spine. I stopped in my tracks, peering into the darkness, trying to make out what was causing the commotion. The streetlight flickered, casting eerie shadows that danced on the leaves. The growling intensified, and I realized with a jolt that whatever was in those bushes was much larger than a cat or raccoon. My heart pounded in my chest as I took a cautious step back, contemplating whether to turn and run, or stay and investigate. Curiosity won out, and I edged closer, my breath coming in shallow, nervous gasps. Just as I was about to peer into the bushes, a figure emerged. It was a man, or at least, it appeared to be at first glance. He was tall and gaunt, with long, matted hair hanging over his face. His clothes were tattered and dirty, and his eyes glowed an unnatural yellow in the dim light. He moved with a jerky, almost animalistic gait, and his growl turned into a guttural hiss as he fixed his gaze on me. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Do you need help?" He didn't respond, just kept staring at me with those piercing eyes. A wave of fear washed over me, and I instinctively took another step back. The man took a step forward, emerging fully from the bushes. That's when I noticed his hands. They were clawed, with long, sharp nails that looked more like talons. Panic surged through me as I realized this was no ordinary person. I turned and bolted, my footsteps pounding on the pavement as I ran as fast as I could. The growls and hisses behind me grew louder, and I could hear the rapid, uneven footsteps of the creature giving chase. The streetlights flickered again, plunging the street into brief moments of darkness that only heightened my terror. I darted through the neighborhood, my lungs burning and my legs aching, but I didn't dare slow down. Finally, I saw my house in the distance, a beacon of safety. I pushed myself harder, adrenaline fueling my sprint. I reached my front door, fumbling with my keys as I glanced over my shoulder. The creature was nowhere in sight, but the darkness and shadows seemed to close in around me. I managed to unlock the door and burst inside, slamming it shut behind me and locking it tight. I collapsed against the door, my breath coming in ragged gasps. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. The rational part of me wanted to believe it was some kind of prank or a hallucination brought on by exhaustion, but the primal fear I felt told me otherwise. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the window, watching the street, half expecting to see those glowing yellow eyes staring back at me. The neighborhood felt different, darker, and more sinister. I never went jogging at night again, and every time I passed that thicket of bushes, I couldn't help but quicken my pace, my heart pounding with the memory of that strange, scary, and creepy encounter.